The router isn't a stationary tool. Well, I want to talk about it because it's really one of the most versatile tools you have in your shop. First, what is the router? Well, at its heart, you've got a motor with a shaft that extends out one end, and that shaft holds a collet that holds a cutting bit. Now the collets come in two sizes. There's a 1/4 inch collet and a 1/2 inch collet. And as you tighten this nut in the collet, that tightens its grip around the bit, holding it securely in the router. Bits, of course, will then come in 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch shanks. If you have a choice, opt for the 1/2 inch shanks. The larger size of this gives you more area to grip, and it gives you a smoother running bit. Some bits you have only one option. They'll only come in a 1/4 inch shanks, typically smaller bits. So if you have to have a 1/4 inch, you have to have a 1/4 inch, and that's why it's good to have both sizes of collets. There are two types of routers. The first is a fixed base. Here, as the motor fits in a base, it slides up and down in that base to set your bit height. And once you've got the bit properly set, you lock it in place, and now you can perform your work. The other type is frankly a little more versatile for handheld work. This is a plunge router. Here you've got the motor and the collet and the bit mounted in the collet. The difference is that the motor is mounted onto two spring-loaded rods so that you can start with the bit above your work, start the bit running, and then plunge it into the work, move it along, and at the end of a cut, make a clean exit by raising the bit up. Let me show you how these work. I'll start with a fixed base router. First, set how far the bit extends past the base. That's the depth of your cut. To make a stopped cut, that is, one that starts in the middle of a board, on a standard router you have to tip the router so the bit clears the workpiece. Then start the router and tip the router down. Route to the end, stop the router and wait for the bit to stop before lifting it up. On a plunge router, I set the bit by plunging the bit until it touches my bench top, then locking it in place. To set the depth of cut, I set this stop rod so it's the desired distance above the stop. I can start the router with the bit above the workpiece, plunge it straight down, and lift it out of the cut at the end. Let's take a minute to talk about the router bits. If you look in the woodworking catalogs or in stores, you are going to see literally hundreds of types of profiles, and it can be a little overwhelming as to which ones do you need. Bits fall into one of two basic categories. There are those that have a bearing, like this, and these are meant to run along the edge of a workpiece to cut a profile. For example, here on this chamfer bit, you've got the bearing that runs along the edge of the profile, and as the cutter spins, it makes that chamfer along the edge. The other type of bit is those without a bearing. Here's a V-groove bit and a dovetail bit. Now these are meant to work in the middle of a workpiece. The bearing doesn't get in the way, so if you were to plunge this into the middle, you could cut a V-groove here using the tip of the bit. Those without a bearing need to be guided in some way. Earlier you saw me routing the plunge cut in the middle of that board. In that case, the router is being guided by the straight edge to give me a straight cut. Now you can use these freehand if you like, if that's the effect you're after. For example, sign makers, when they're making signs that have the letters that extend above a relieved field, that's pretty much done freehand with a straight bit in the router, plunging it in and simply guiding around a pattern. A handheld router is very convenient for a lot of jobs. For example, if we wanted to route an edge around this workbench, take the router right to it, and you can route all the way around this workbench. There are times, however, where, for example, if you wanted to do the edge on a small piece like this, trying to balance that router on there can be a little bit iffy. You don't have much of the base resting on there. Router can tip, gouge at the edge of your workpiece, ruining it. So there are times where instead of taking the router to the workpiece it's easier to take the workpiece to the router, and that's where a router table comes in. Now, a router table, the router hangs upside down below the table, mounted to a plate like this. Plate goes in, and that's perfectly flush with the top of the table. Now you can take your workpiece and guide it past the bit. You have much better control now. You don't have to worry about the bit tipping or anything. The other great advantage that a router table offers is it gives you a chance to use a fence. What the fence can do is slide right up to the bit. You can set the fence flush with the bearing. And now you can use the fence as a bearing surface right past the bit, helping you guide even a longer piece. And you can take the fence, even push it farther forward so that you're using only part of the profile of a bit. So for example, on this bit, we have a round over bit in there with just part of it exposed. Now, one of the other advantages that a router table fence offers you is the chance to have a dust collection port on the back side. And if you hook up a shop vacuum or a dust collection system to that port, you can collect a lot of the chips that are made before they ever hit your shop floor. So far I've been routing the long edges of a workpiece. Routing around the end of a narrow end of a piece requires a little bit different technique. If you try to move it past the bit like this, it's probably going to wobble, not really terribly safe. Instead, you can just grab a piece of scrap out of your scrap bin, put it against the fence, and hold your workpiece against the scrap and the fence, and now you've got a much steadier assembly to go past the bit. And in addition, that workpiece, that scrap, backs up the cut so you get a very nice clean exit at the back of the cut. So that's just a little bit of what you can do with a router table. You can see it's a real valuable item to have in your woodworking shop. Now, as you're shopping for a router, consider using it in a router table, and frankly, the best router to put into a router table is a fixed base. The reason for that is you're not fighting those spring-loaded rods when it comes time to make bit height adjustments. So does that mean you need two routers, well, fixed base to put in your router table and a plunge router to do your handheld work? Well, not necessarily. There's a bit of a compromise, a solution for that. That is the combination kit. With a combination kit, you get one motor and two bases, a plunge base and a fixed base. Since you're only using one at a time anyway, this can be a great way for you to spend just a little bit more than the price of a single router and really get two. Keep the fixed base mounted in your router table, put the motor in there when you need it, and when you need handheld work that plunge router is better suited for, you've got that at your disposal too. If you'd like to find more free videos about what a router can do for you, visit our website, woodmagazine.com.